about this Olympic game, this final hockey game. What'd you guys think about that?
I used to be a huge hockey fan. I couldn't tell you how, like, the difference between a red line or a blue line, really. But I love the Philadelphia Flyers, of course. Growing up in Philly, like, if you're not a Flyers fan, they'll boo you out of your hometown. But I fell off, and obviously with the Olympics, I'm like, if I'm gonna watch a game, I think it's appropriate I watch this one. Especially because I kept up with the drama from last season with the 4-nation cup, where it was like Canada, US, and 2 other countries, and all that happened, them losing in overtime last year. So they played them a year ago, lost in overtime. And then this year, I mean, ultimately, though, I think it was like, for me, it was how the game was won. Like, the kid that plays for the Devils who won it on that
Jack Hughes.
Jack Hughes is incredible. But like, what kind of went a little bit, I mean, I wouldn't say unnoticed, that save by the goalie. Dude, that was like the save of all saves.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever put on goalie hockey gear. It's insane. Like, I can't even dude.
Yeah.
You can't, you have no peripheral vision. Like, that's obviously 15 years ago that I did that when I was like 10, but yeah, it was insane. Not crazy game.
Yeah, we watched from the beginning, and then like I waited absolutely as long as I could to try to watch the overtime, but we had to leave for church. So I should not have done this, but I put it on my phone so we could watch it on the way to church. And by the time I had it on, they'd already scored that overtime goal, and I missed the whole thing.
The Jack Hughes speech. Let's just revisit this for a second. First of all, the poise, just the calmness of mind that he's just delivering this, and the reporter is asking him several times and setting him up where he can just completely just talk about himself. Yeah, it was a great goal, all this kind of stuff. But the first thing he starts pointing out is the team and how great of a win this is for the nation, how great of a win this is for America. Gives a shout out to the goalie, and he talks about brotherhood. So what do you guys think about this? I mean, this honestly was one of the most impressive wins I think I've ever seen. Certainly up there with that 1980 game, if not better. And the fact that there's just such a humbling nature from the guy who scores the goal. He's missing the teeth. He's wearing the flag when he skates around. I mean, if this doesn't scream America, I don't know what does. I want to hear y'all's thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome to me. Like, as I was thinking through about what we might talk about today, some of the things that came up were like some of the mentors that I've had over the years in the military, and the ones who I first wrote down as I was kind of jotting notes down to myself were the ones who were the most selfless. Like, the reasons I wrote them down were because, for example, simple things like one of them, when I would walk to his office and knock on the door, he would stop everything he was doing and turn around and talk to me directly. Whereas, most leaders were like, yeah, what do you want? Kind of like that, like looking up from their desk. The other one, a general officer, had no reason to spend any time with me whatsoever. And he did this for multiple people that I know. He would take hours at a time and just sit down with you and talk professional development. Tell you how to make yourself.
That's like super rare.
Yeah. And those two things really stick out to me. And that's that kind of selflessness that, like, it's tough to train it, and people, but you can obviously instill it in people, but it takes a lot. And to see somebody on that stage with that much voice and that much spotlight on him, for that to be the first thing he thinks about talking about, that's just awesome.
It really is. It really is. Again, hats off to them. Hats off to the team. Just to cap it all off. And I don't know if you guys have seen that picture too with him in the American flag, and that picture is going to be, that's a Time magazine cover.
I think that'll, yeah, that's what I think that'll be on Time magazine at some point this year. That, or at least, like, I don't know if ESPN still does magazines or anything, but that photo, I mean, I think about his parents. I'm like, dude, like how, like that dude's parents are like that's getting framed. Like how do you, just the amount of like pride that they probably have, because the way he went about the interview too, like you said, I mean, he had every opportunity in the world to be like, I'm the man, right? Like I did that. This is, and instead he just completely like, if you watch that, I don't know how you couldn't like the guy.
No,
You know what I mean? You're like, I don't know how you couldn't like with him, or you wouldn't want to play with him after that.
Well, I love that you brought up his parents too, Joe, because like one of the things I have this like almost habitual thing that I do when I meet somebody who seems exceptional or like has just got all their stuff together. One of my first questions is to ask them about their parents, like, because you know, as a father of three boys, I'm like, I want to steal that, whatever it is that got you to where you are. I need to start doing it with my sons. And so the parents aspect to me is a huge thing, like what it takes, one, to get to that level in sports, but two, to have that level of character says something a lot also about his parents as well.
Well, yeah, I think his dad was, I think he has a lineage within the NHL.
Yeah.
And his mom, if I'm not mistaken, has Olympic ties as well.
His mom has an Olympic tie. Doesn't he has a brother? Did I read
Yes.
that?
Yeah. So his older brother, it plays for the Minnesota Wild. He's Quinn Hughes. And if you recall from the game with Sweden, he was the defenseman that scored in the overtime winner in that game, which is wild.
Right. That's why, yeah, that's where it's like,
right. And honestly, you know, and gentlemen, we could talk about this game all day, and this is probably Joey, this is gonna have to be a separate episode in itself. But I really wanted one of the reasons why I wanted to get into that is because I really want the theme of the day today, if we're going to call it that, to be brotherhood. And but before we get to that, first thing I want to do is introduce Jon Bleakley, our first guest of the podcast, and we're so excited to have him on here. Jon has an exceptional career. You know, he's here to share a little bit more about his experiences with special forces. And doing some consultancy after his service time. And so, Jon, you know, it's a pleasure to have you on here, sir. And so I really, more than anything I wanted to do today is really kind of get into this idea of brotherhood and how you experience that. Obviously, we're here to talk about leadership in sports. But what I love about our podcast is it has this military aura to it. And I think no better way to kick things off is to bring you on. So it's exciting to have you on here. And Jon, if you want to kind of give us a quick backstory of, you know, how you became Jon Bleakley.
Yeah, sure. So my dad was in the military, and I've had, you know, parents, grandparents, and aunts and uncles in the military for, you know, generations. And I first enlisted in the Army Reserves and rose to the high rank of specialist. I'm an official member of the E4 Mafia, and then transferred, got an ROTC scholarship, and went to Colorado State University for undergrad. Was an artillery officer, and then transferred over into a special operations career field called civil affairs. From there, I led teams as small as 4 people in Eastern Iraq, all the way up to 300 when I commanded a battalion at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You know, I've completed Ranger School, Parachute Jump Master, highest levels of SEER School, and I've done some pretty cool stuff. I spent about 4 years of my career in combat zones out of that total 25 years. After retiring from the military just 5 years ago, I started working at Samaritan's Purse doing disaster response. Also took on a part-time role at the program doing leadership development with both athletic and corporate clients. Rose to the point of being a senior vice president there at the program, and decided to leave and focus on my current job, which is at Appalachian State University. I teach in the Walker College of Business and the management department there, where I teach classes on leadership, negotiation, conflict resolution, as well as team building and organizational change. And I also lead what we call our adventure leadership program, where I do leadership reaction course style training with students here at Appalachian State, trying to make them that much better on day one. And I'm also leading a trip to Scotland this year, and potentially expanding that into more trips over the next couple of years to get students out into the wild doing leadership training, growing and developing with myself and my fellow faculty members that go, and helping them be more confident and resilient and ready to lead when they hit day one on their professional careers.
Well, that's an exceptional backstory. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I can just see App State's admissions just increasing by the numbers now. So go ahead, Joe. Go ahead. You had a question?
So just a question before I have your some notes pulled up that I just pulled off of LinkedIn. I'm always curious on this, and I've never had the opportunity to ask. What was the biggest shift, I guess, leadership challenge, when you went from a commander in civil affairs, so special operations, to, because I have your LinkedIn pulled up, I took notes off of that, to 18 Airborne Corps?
Oh, that was at 18th Airborne Corps. I was still in the civil affairs unit. So
okay, right.
It was the Army had the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade, and we temporarily for a few years, almost 10 years, stood up the 85th Civil Affairs Brigade to support the global war on terrorism. And I commanded a company and was an S3 in a battalion within that formation. So same basic design, same basic mission, just supporting the conventional mission rather than the soft mission. Really,
okay. So you had guys and gals coming over from civil affairs that were qualified to support.
Right. All trained at SWIC, all speaking foreign languages, hopefully aligned to their geographic regions. And we also had the QRF mission that we took on there, where we had one company on rotation to be a QRF, to be part of the, what's the response force there in the 82nd? I'm blanking on the
now it's called, so I deployed on the GRF.
GRF, there you go. Yeah,
GRF. So that's, yeah, I mean, that could be a whole episode.
But I trained and deployed my company to Pakistan during the 2014 provincial and presidential elections.
Oh, no shit.
From that unit. So we were in Paktika, Gardez, but 7 different provinces within my company.
Right on. That's because now, did you, I guess this may be, you flew into Afghanistan, then crossed the border, or did you?
Oh, for Pakistan. So that was a separate mission. I was in a special operations civil affairs company at the time, and we flew directly to Islamabad, and we had you can read about it. There was a New York Times article about it. I wouldn't call it a covert mission, but it was definitely a low profile mission that was going on there. Only about 100 special operators there in country. And I was there the last half of 2010. And the crazy thing about that trip was not only were we doing our counterinsurgency, counterterrorism work, but a 500-year flood hit the Indus River. And so one of the biggest natural disasters in that region's history, or at least in recent history. So as the civil affairs guy lead on the ground, I kind of became the de facto coordinator and planner for a lot of the stuff that was going on in Peshawar, Pakistan at that time. So pretty crazy, intense 6 months worth of operational time.
Absolutely. Jeez.
Incredible. So to kind of keep it back to more like a high level here, you mentioned the open door policy, and it's funny that some of the best leaders that you've worked with always had open door. Was always, hey, being present. Let me stop what I'm doing. You're my priority right now. That kind of thing. And going back to the Olympic team, I heard that the Kachucks and the Hughes brothers lived across the hall from one another in the village, in the Olympic Village, but they had an open door policy. Their door was always open, even to the point where during the night they had it cracked. But the whole point is, and they were just constantly before every game, they're chopping it up, talking about different things. So to go back from, to speaking about special forces in general, what would you say, because arguably one of the strongest cultures out there, right? And again, I've never experienced it, but I'm curious, what are the intangibles that make that culture so strong? What is it about that culture? And how do you keep it strong? How does it maintain?
Well, to be clear, there's a difference between special forces and special operations, and I want to make sure I make that differentiation, because there'll be people that are the keyboard warriors are going to jump on here and start attacking us. And I was not a special forces Green Beret. I was a special operations civil affairs officer. So
okay, gotcha.
So we did work every time I deployed. I was working with Green Berets and psychological operations and other units in the Joint Force Special Operations. But I think the question is, what makes Special Operations Brotherhood and sisterhood too. We had women in our teams as well. So strong. And I think it's one of the high expectations of trust. We train together, we sweat together, and just like conventional forces do as well, but we have high expectations and high standards, and we hold each other to them. We hold each other accountable to those standards, and if you're not meeting those standards, then you can expect to be held accountable and expect to leave pretty quickly if that doesn't happen. So that generates a level of trust, both the training, the high up tempo, the high training, and the high level of accountability generates a level of trust that doesn't even need to be spoken. You just know it's there.
So do you have any stories that you can share or an example when you talk about, because I will say this much, one of the hardest concepts for any sports team, we all have worked with football teams, any sports teams, and one of the hardest concepts to grasp is holding your peers accountable, and making sure that the leaders are policing the standards on the team. So do you have any examples by chance or any stories that you could share?
Well, there's been times where people didn't perform and they were removed from the unit. And, that actually happened pretty early in pretty early when I came over into special operations from the conventional Army. And I saw a guy who was on the range and who was doing things that were unsafe, and he was removed from the unit very quickly. So that impressed me, and it was a big marker for me that you're expected to perform every single day. You're constantly being assessed, and selection never ends, as they say. So, but I'll tell you something that kind of reflects on that accountability and that trust that I was just talking about. In June of 2010, I deployed to Pakistan just 2 weeks after my son Isaac was born, our middle son. So that was already a challenge and a little bit of a stressor. Get there, and we're doing the counterterrorism and the counterinsurgency mission. And then, like I was just saying, the 500-year flood hit the Indus River, and there were hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people on top of the Turki Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, and the Al-Qaeda networks and Haqqani networks that were operating there. So just more work than we could handle. So I was on the road, 18 hours a day in Peshawar, coordinating between the different embassies and the different military and disaster response agencies. And one day I was traveling with a fellow government employee. He was a USAID employee, not even military. And we got stopped at a checkpoint. And long story short, it was 4 Pakistani Taliban guys that were trying to kidnap us. And if you think back on that time around 2010, there were a lot of those YouTube videos going on that people were getting their heads cut off on YouTube by insurgents around the world. And as this was kind of playing out in front of me, and as I was trying to decide what to do, those videos, the idea that those videos were out there flashed in my head, and I thought to myself, like, there's no way this is going to be my fate. Like, I'm not going to be the guy on video that my family has to know this happened to the rest of their lives. So I picked up on some cues, realized that this was not a real checkpoint. They were bad guys disguised as Pakistani Frontier Corps members, and they were trying to kidnap me. And I basically drove through their car that they were using as a roadblock and busted my way out of there, and got back to the safe house, or the operations house, and my boss handed me a letter with it was an intelligence source report saying that there was a $150,000 price on my head, and that they had assigned a suicide bomber to kill me personally because they were pissed off that they had missed me. Why do I tell you this? Like, I'm not just like, that seems like a diversion from what we're talking about. The point is, I had to leave Peshawar that day. Like, I was operationally ineffective from then on. So my second in command, a female major who was my second in command, I had a matter of hours to talk to her and say, hey, you're in charge now. I got to get out of here. You're leading this 10-person element that's operating here. See you later. Because we had trained together, and because we had worked together so closely and knew each other so well, and had built that trust and had held each other accountable one way and the other. She had held me accountable. I had held her accountable. I knew that I could leave and that the team would be in good hands. But it took that level of trust to be able to do that. And that was, kind of an extreme version of that. But that's the story that pops into my head when I think about that.
That is insane. I can't even imagine your headspace at that point, but just to have the calmness of mind to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not gonna. There's not gonna be I'm not gonna be indecisive in this particular situation. That's incredible.
I mean, dude, that's like, what was the reaction? I'm just of the Taliban check, like the
So
mafia.
I was in an armored Land Cruiser.
Were you in an up armored like vehicle and you were just?
Yeah, it was a Land Cruiser that was armored, they knew what I was in. They had done some pretty significant surveillance on me. They knew who I was, and I'm like a 6'2" white guy with a red beard in Peshawar, Pakistan. So I'm not hiding from anybody. I was in local clothes actually, shalwar kameez, but they knew that even if they shot at me with their AK-47s, it wasn't really going to do anything. I mean, they came for business. One of the things that tipped me off that these were not good guys was they had a 100-round drum on one of their AK-47s, and so it wasn't your standard government issue stuff.
No, definitely not.
So John, one of my questions is, and this is certainly something that we talk about football teams all the time, is just, when you're building a culture and why it's so important, or how the leaders have a play in building the culture. But it seems to me that what comes down to it, it's shared hardship and spending a lot of time together. Like, I feel like it really kind of boils down to those two things. So I'm just curious, the teams that you're with, is that valid to say that? And how would you describe, really what builds the strength of the culture, and how the leader has a play in that? Did you feel both those things? Is that what made some of the teams you were part of strong? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that says a lot right there. Just that shared hardship and that time together is a big thing. And I've seen it, as an instructor at the program as well, working with athletic teams. I saw that firsthand. Putting those teams through some kind of military style training, whether it was with rubber boats or doing leadership reaction courses, or some induced stress by doing some stuff in the swimming pool. You could watch in a 24-hour period or 48-hour period, you could watch those teams gel and get to know each other. And I mean, both of you have, I'm sure, been in a very difficult practice where your coach's intent was not even to practice, it was just to smoke you. And
of course, that. Yeah.
How the team comes together after something like that. And I think you can't understate the importance of that. And I think there's so many things in our culture today that draw us away from doing hard things, that it really sticks with people when you induce them to do something hard.
I want to say, so like this is one thing I was talking about this week with one of my buddies, and just because I recently transitioned out of the military, like I don't have any crazy stories like that. Like I had a quick deployment to Iraq. We were FOBITs, never left the post, right? But I think the one thing the military does, really the Army particularly well, it's sink or swim. So there's a lot of situations where it's just like in your situation, the most extreme situation humanly possible. It's like, she capable 10%. You didn't even question that in your mind, right? But a lot of shit, like in the 82nd, there was a lot of times where it's like, no, dude, you're up. Like there is no other option. Like you're taking control of the platoon, you're taking control of the squad. And I think that does a lot, like there's a lot of good in that, because you have really no choice but to be successful and lean on the individuals that have been in the position long enough to support and learn from being in that environment. And I don't see that in the civilian world. And like my wife, she's been in corporate America for like 10, 11 years now. And I'm like, I think that's what's significantly lacking is there's not a lot of chance given. There's not a lot of they evaluate the risk. And if they think for 1 second you don't mark a box, it seems like they're quick to be like, nope, we got to find the perfect individual. Whereas like, there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of capabilities, but they're just not given the opportunity. And the military grants the opportunity really pretty frequent. That's my experience in the 82nd and really at Fort Hood. Like, all right, dude, you're up. Like you're expected to perform. And I hope you do so.
I don't think you can underestimate the power of delegation and the buzzword of empowerment. And so many of us as leaders, and I can say this up for the first half of my career as an officer, I don't know if I'd say afraid to delegate, but I was reluctant to delegate. But I justified it to myself. I told myself, like, I'm going to take on as much as I can so that I'm not burdening everyone around me, which is BS. By doing that, I was prohibiting those leaders underneath me from growing as individuals and as professionals. If I had just said, hey, you take these 5 tasks out of my 10, they would have gotten that much better. And it took me basically becoming an operations officer for an entire battalion to realize I couldn't do it all myself anymore. And the work would suffer if I continued to try to do so, even more than it already had, admittedly. So I don't think you can underestimate and understate the power of delegation and empowerment.
So in purposes of first of all, I can completely, that when you said that just hit so many bells in my head, because that same exact thing happened with my legal team that I'm working on right now. You know, I've studied leadership for the past 10 years, but this is arguably the first leadership opportunity I've had in the professional sector, aside from, you know, just leading, you know, a football team and working, you know, being a coach for a football team. But, you know, you have to make this decision at some point where it's, okay, what's going to be my leadership style? You know, at the end of the day, I want to be as true to myself as I can possibly be. Am I going to be a hard ass? Am I going to be, you know, hey, Mr. Empathy? Am I going to be a little bit of both? And, but the first couple of weeks, it was, hey, I want to lead by example, and I'm going to take on as much as I possibly can. And that way I'm giving them some time back, because I know this is a crazy time. I know I'm going to need their help, but effectively that did hurt us, because yeah, we have an inexperienced team member and they need some room to grow. You know, it's important to kind of give them some stake in the game and give them some ownership. But so thank you for saying that. That just hit the nail on the head. So I'm curious, you mentioned that you had some mentors and some leaders that you looked up to. So when you first stepped into that leadership role, you know, speaking about the intangibles and kind of how you wanted to lead, was there any tools and tricks that you picked up from your mentors, or, you know, was there a mentor that was a role model for you, and you tried to emulate them as best as you could? So I'm just curious how you kind of went through that mentally.
Yeah, I can give you a few examples. And the two I mentioned, John Silkman and General Ken Tovo, both, like I said, being deliberate and intentional about sharing their time with me. And I saw, it wasn't just me, I saw them do it with other people as well. That made a huge impact on me, and it influenced me as I went into my next roles, especially as a battalion commander, where I had 55 in special operations. You have a higher rank structure. So I had 55 captains in my battalion and 17 majors. And they all, for whatever reason, wanted to have time, you know, for professional development, to ask questions about their growth and development. They all wanted time with the battalion commander. It makes sense. So I had to be very intentional and deliberate, and in like to the point where I was making time in my calendar that said, get out and walk around, get out of your office, put these blocks of time on your calendar for people to book. But then there's others. And one is a retired Colonel Bill Rice. He was actually a fellow student of mine at the Civil Affairs course. So we were both going through the Special Operations pipeline at the time together. And I'll tell you a quick story on that. I had a tendency to complain a lot when I was a young guy. And I got to Civil Affairs Civil Affairs training right out of Ranger School. I'd gone to Ranger School after I'd become a captain. Just graduated Ranger School. My head was still shaved. I get to Civil Affairs course, and there's a lot of downtime, a lot of waiting outside for an NCO to come out and tell us what the next thing we were going to do was, take accountability, all the kind of stuff you do in a formation. And I would always stand in the back of the formation and just whine, like, why? I've got family at home. I've got a new kid at home. Why are we wasting all this time? This is such a waste of my time. Got to wait for these knuckleheads. One weekend, my buddy Bill Rice and I are driving down to Wilmington to go surfing. And I turned to him, I'm driving, and I said, you know, I don't think Sergeant so-and-so, the platoon sergeant, I don't think he really likes me. And Bill turns and looks at me and he goes, you know, John, I don't think any of the NCOs like you. Typical John could have been like, no, I'm just keeping it real. I'm trying to get some justice here. But for some reason that hit me, because it was a friend. It was a friend I had trusted. He could hold me accountable because I trusted him and I was close with him. So instead of reacting poorly to that, I took it into account and I asked him, what do you mean? And he said, well, you're always complaining. You don't make the situation any better. You're aggravating all the young soldiers and NCOs that are in front of you. Like, it's just not helpful. So I can see why none of the NCOs like you. That changed the way I approached everything I did for the rest of my career since then. My natural tendency to complain because I wanted justice went away. I quit complaining unless it was, something that was truly justified that I needed to elevate to the next level. But it changed my day-to-day interactions with everybody. And so him holding me accountable in that way really changed the direction of my leadership style and my just how I carry myself in daily life, much less in professional life.
That. So, because one of the challenges that I think any football team, especially if and I know I keep saying football team, but any sports team, really what the coach wants more than anything is their leaders.
I want to give a quick shout out to our Watauga High School football team that just won the 6A state championship.
Yeah. So, we talk about this idea of accountability all the time, and I think a lot of high school, especially high school athletes, certainly college athletes as well, and I'd even say the pro athletes have a hard time holding each other accountable. And one of the things that you said was that it sunk in because you trusted him and you respected him. And I think that is something that I think is missing a lot. And especially, for example, this past week, we had a player who's currently playing lacrosse, but he's also lifting with the football team. And that is a big excuse. Well, I'm in season for this sport. Why should I be working out? I'm already getting my workout. And what they're missing is the fact that, you're missing all the cohesion. You're missing spending the thousands of hours with your team right now. These are things that are important to grow this team and this culture. He gets it. And he does both. He does the workout and he does his lacrosse. And he shared something during a call this week. And he said, I attempted to hold one of my teammates accountable because he's just dogging a play. He's in the practice and he's just not taking it seriously. And I kind of came in to give him a little correction. And the guy came back to him and said, "What do you think, you're better than me?" And he's like, "How do I respond to that?" And I said, and honestly, I don't think there's a perfect solution or perfect answer for this one. But the one thing I did say to him is that if they are firing back at you at that, in my opinion, this is insecurity.
100%.
This is, you're hitting something that hurt them.
Projection going on there, yeah.
But it's also telling me that he doesn't respect you. He doesn't respect you yet. And as much as you want to be like, "All right, asshole," look inside and this is where you need to be humble. And you need to say, "You know what? I haven't earned his trust yet. I haven't earned his respect yet. I'm going to demonstrate it on the field. I'm going to continuously try to care for him and be there for him. But at the same time, I'm not going to let down on my accountability. It's just, there's going to be a certain point in time where it's going to click. And if you've done all the work, you've demonstrated those intangibles, eventually it's going to click." And he's going to be like, "All right, man, you're right. You're right. I got it." So that's a really interesting point that you made there. And I think that's something that we see all the time. What do you think, Joey? I mean, I think in your experiences, you've seen that too. And it's just a challenging thing for any team, any leader.
I mean, yeah, I think high school in particular is really tough because, when you get to the college level and when you evaluate that and you evaluate the NFL, I think college, in my opinion, is most productive. If this is just from a consumer point of view, someone who watches it a lot, is more productive in terms of like accountability for the athletes because, NFL has its, just own problems in terms of like salary cap, the salaries and like the egos.
Players union.
I think the biggest issue is in high school is the season's going to be over and these kids are like, "Well, what about my friends?" And they're not looking at, like, I have 3 friends from high school. That's it. And I think I would say I'm lucky, right? And I don't talk to anyone that I played high school football with. Well, one guy, he's the godfather of my son. And like, looking back at it, it's just, I think kids would, especially on a football team, would be much more productive if they just realize, like, dude, this isn't about being cool, man. Just do the job. Like, and like you said, I think it's just insecurity from, that comment, "What do you think, you're better than me?" I'm like, well, that's just insecurity. And you can only hope he grows out of it. And that's a tough thing to change, especially peer-to-peer leadership is extremely difficult. I worked in the 82nd, I worked for my best friend for 2 years. And I was a complainer at multiple points in my career. When I was in the 82nd, starting out, and then when I was at the tail end of my time there on orders to go up to recruiting command and work for Colonel Ramos. He was my battalion commander. And the tail end was tough because we did a platoon switch, and I had like 4 months left, and I'm sitting in the field, and I'm running the platoon for HHC, like all the vehicles that are out there. And I'm like, it's 105 degrees. I'm like, dude, what are we doing? But then I got to snap back and realize, like, if I'm like this right now, there's 40 dudes that are a support element for the guys that are humping 80 pounds on their back that I'm supposed to be maneuvering because I'm like not a squad leader anymore. And I'm, because I'm PCSing. I got to shut up like really quick. Like these guys are going to be in a world of hurt, like, because we were pretty critical. Our mission out there is pretty critical. I mean, we were refilling water every checkpoint that we got. So if I'm complaining and, bitching for lack of better terms, I got to shut up. And so eventually I just it clicked. I'm like, all right, dude, let's just ride the wave and just do the right thing all the way out. But not to go off the rails there. I think peer-to-peer leadership, especially in high school, is the most fascinating because it's the most difficult. And especially young in the Army, peer-to-peer leadership is so hard. Like I remember when I got my P status at Fort Hood, and it was like my friends that I was privates with were like, oh, you changed, don't talk to me, you changed, like, piss off, bro. Like you're not part of the mafia anymore, the E4 mafia. And then like down at Fort Hood, man, when you got promoted, when you got your P status, it was like you were a corporal that afternoon.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because they respected you, it was because they wanted you on CQ to pull the 24-hour. So yeah, it's hard. And high school is the hardest part. High school is the hardest part to hold your friends accountable.
My oldest son just got pinned corporal late last year. I got to go down there to Texas, and he's in the Marine Corps, and I got to go down and promote him. So that was pretty awesome.
Good for him.
Yeah,
see him kind of take on that burden of being a young NCO in the Marine Corps is pretty awesome. But going back to the discussion about holding each other accountable, like I had people tell me I complained too much before, and I just blew it off. And it took somebody who I had built that trust and that respect for to really listen and take it into account. And like I said, it was life-changing for me. It changed the way I approached everything. That one sentence he said to me.
Do you think, because I was also talking about this week with the same guy reference I worked for 2 years. We talk every day. Do you think you learn more from bad leaders than you do good?
Yeah.
And,
what?
Like, I was talking about that. I'm like, I really think that I learned more from guys, and not necessarily bad, but guys that maybe be young in the position, or, I've definitely had some experiences where I'm like, oof, this guy's rough. Like he's rough to work for. But I learned you can take away so much from that.
Yeah. One of the stories I tell students and clients and everything alike is I had, when I was a platoon leader in Germany, I had a company commander and a company first sergeant who didn't like each other and wouldn't even talk to each other.
Oh my God.
And you can, Joe, I'm sure you can imagine, if you haven't experienced that, you can imagine the chaos that creates. Like, can't even be professional enough to talk to each other, to get on the same sheet of music about what the company's doing. And that caused, on one end, it caused very low morale because everybody else in the company had to scramble to try to figure out what to do. Like we would have a company first sergeant meeting in the morning, the NCOs, and a company commander meeting with the officers. We get told what we're doing today, and it would be completely different. So we'd have to have another meeting after PT, deconflict what he had told them and they had told us, and figure out what the actual plan for the day was, eating up our time. The thing that it did was, everybody can unite against a common enemy. So we were a very tight group between the platoons and the headquarters.
Oh yeah.
We were tight bonded and really trusted each other because we couldn't stand the way the leadership was acting. And I learned that commitment to professionalism and to positive communication those are the two biggest things I took away from that experience, like how important that could be. Like, I don't care if you give me the worst first sergeant or worst command sergeant major in the entire Army, I'm going to still be professional enough to bring that united front to the company or to the battalion or whatever, for the sake of the soldiers and officers and NCOs that are in that unit.
So, John, I'm going to get you. This is, I feel like, a good question for this time of year. Let me give you an example, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this one. But let's just pretend that you are a football coach, head football coach. You just got hired to take over this team after several losing seasons, or honestly, this day and age, maybe you had a pretty decent season, but it just wasn't good enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you step into this team, and whoever the coach, maybe the coach leaving or one of the assistant coaches who's staying there, is like, hey, listen, I got to tell you something. You got some toxicity in the locker room. We got a lot of ego going on with this team. Really, this team lacks identity and they lack culture. But I know your experience. I know you're going to do just fine. Walk me through those first 6 months at a high level. Like what are some of the things, because I'm thinking if a coach is watching this, like what would you want them to know? Like if they were to reshape the culture, not an easy job by any means, but just given your experiences with special operations, like where would you start? Like what are some of the things to be thinking about? I'll just kind of leave it at that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you both touched on it a little bit about that shared adversity and the importance of that. And I think that can be mistaken. Like just kicking a team's butt just for the sake of kicking their butt is not what you want to do. You have to you have to explain to them what the point of the adversity is, build into it a system where you're actually building that culture where they can hold each other accountable. So like if you conduct a training event where you're trying to put them into a situation where they're getting their butts kicked and they're sharing that adversity, they're sweating together, they're bleeding together, and rotating leaders through those points of shared adversity, whether it's your team captains, your leadership council, which is a side note. Like I think if teams don't have a leadership council, then they're missing a great opportunity there to not only develop those kids, but also to make the team more cohesive and tighter bonded. But having the leaders rotate through those challenges and then debriefing what they did. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we get better from here on out? And not just like talking in generalities, but having players that observed and participated in that event, and even in practice as well. I'm not just talking about some specific discrete event, but over the course of time, having players give feedback to those leaders directly, where you're letting them exercise accountability and hold each other accountable, leaders to players to leaders and leaders to players. That builds that trust that like, hey, if he's out of position on the field, whether it's lacrosse, football, whatever, I can yell at him and tell him to get his butt in position. And he knows it's for the greater good of the team. It's not personal. And I think that's a lot of what it's about, especially at those younger ages. It's taking that personal side of it out, helping them to understand that it's for the good of the organization and that they can have those conversations, whether it's a brief position adjustment or a longer term, like, hey, dude, you're not keeping up with the rest of us. You've got to get your stuff together.
So one of the things that, I love studying Coach Nick Saban, and one of the things he always talked about was his high standards, right? It's like I had high expectations and I held this team to very, very high standards. And we're going to be very disciplined about what we're disciplined about how we go about things here. So that was kind of a high level, but I want to kind of get really specific for just a second. Can you talk about some of the standards that maybe were spoken standards as opposed to written standards when you were in your teams and your units? Was there certain standards or a code that you had to go by? And could you give some examples of like what some of those standards were for maybe discipline or, punctuality, those kinds of things?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the military in general, you've got for an artillery mission, a time on target. You got a time to depart the LD, the line of departure. I think of the unit that the warrant officer that got awarded the Medal of Honor on the State of the Union the other night. That unit that he's from, their standard is plus or minus 30 seconds to a target. So even if it's a 3-hour flight from their base to where they're landing, they have to be on time at the planned time within 30 seconds of that time.
That's insane. That is nuts.
It is.
Which like it makes sense, like knowing the nature of that like unit. Like when I say knowing the nature, like I don't, just understanding the level that they operate at.
And this is the Night Stalkers, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I've only been privileged to fly in their helicopters once or twice, but they have that high reputation because they have those high standards. And I think, that's a written standard that they have. But for my unit, where I come from in the special operations community, sometimes our teams are the only special operations team in the entire country, like a 4-man and women team, the only one in country, especially in places like Central America, the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, places like that. They might be the only team in that country. So they bear that burden of the nation's reputation on their shoulders everywhere they go. So how you conduct yourself professionally, how you communicate, your nighttime activities when you've got time off, all those things bear weight. And there's been consequences of those things. Those consequences can have like international incident level.
Sure. There is, 100%.
Things, and they have. And I can think of a few things. I'm not going to bring them back but I can think of.
I said for sure, and I was like, there is an event that I'm like, I can't say that. Never mind.
Yeah. There's a few that have happened that have been an embarrassment on not just that 4-person team or that 12-man ODA or that 6-man SIOP detachment or whatever, but for the entire country of America, especially within that foreign country that they're in. So all those little things, the little things that just being a good human, that translates to what you need to being a good special operator and to being a good athlete, to being a good professor at Appalachian State, whatever it is. Being a good human never will serve you poorly. So
this will be my last question. I know we're getting at time here, but
I didn't know.
this has been such a great conversation. One of the things that I think is just as equally as important, and this is my opinion, and I'd love to hear what you both think about this, but just as much as it's so important to have these high standards, to set these high expectations, to lead by example, to be a professional in how you go about your business. But also equally important is to kind of keep it light, is to do some fun things, have a sense of humor about when you're doing these things, especially when you guys are going through hardship, when when you're in uncomfortable places, you're in the muck, all those kinds of things. So I'm just curious, and I'm going to keep it very kind of a high level question here, but just what would you guys do to kind of keep things light? Was there some things that you did to have fun, just to kind of, hey, reset where you're just not robot all the time,
Like in a training or deployment environment?
I will say, I'm just going to, just whatever comes to mind. Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is like being wet and cold. I mean, dude, that's everything about that sucks. And I remember we had this, and this guy's awesome. I had this, he was a machine gunner in my platoon in the 82nd. And we just got done with our JRTC rotation in Fort Polk, Louisiana, the worst place in America. And it was just brutal. Like we did like a last culminating mission was like, we SP'd at 04 and didn't hit the objective until 7 a.m. the next day. And we were just walking we ran out of water, had to sling load in a water buffalo. It was a mess. But it was great training. And we have to go the next day. We get like an hour to rest, and it just pisses on us. And the weather just gets a little bit colder, and the wind starts coming in, and we have to go do a talk-through on the live fire complex. We're going to do a live fire in like a week from now, and we're sleeping in the field until then. And it's covered in rain, and it's just the dirt, and everyone's just wet, cold, and miserable. And this machine gunner comes up, and they're like, they say his name. They're like, hey man, come on, get on the berm. He's like being a smart ass. And he comes up and he's just like, Roger that, Sergeant. And just like throws himself into this massive puddle and like lays on, like takes it. Like you would have thought he was like in the live fire. And like the whole platoon bursted out laughing. And you're just like, even the platoon sergeant's like, dude, that's the funniest thing that I've seen in the 15 days we've been on here. And like looking back at that, I think that was a super important time in the shittiest times ever. If you like, misery loves company. if you're miserable, everyone's going to be miserable. And if you're miserable, it's going to make it a whole lot worse. You might as well just smile through the hurt and the suck. And you might as well just laugh through it, man. That's the first thing that always comes to mind when he did that. It was the funniest thing like I saw. I like it. Oh man.
Joe, you've talked a couple of times about things where you're kind of taking personal accountability for the morale. Like you talked about misery, your misery breeds your unit's misery. Your complaining breeds your unit's complaining. You know, the old saying, calm breeds calm, chaos breeds chaos.
Yeah.
All those things are so true. And I think if you're in a unit where somebody's afraid to jump into that puddle, afraid to crack a joke every once in a while, then there's probably some serious leadership challenges in that unit, because leaders have to understand that stuff is necessary. I worked for a 2-star general when I was my last deployment. I was working for a 2-star general operating between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, the Special Operations Task Force over there. And he, after every meeting, we would meet with like these CIA station chiefs, ambassadors, high-end people, and after every one we would get together and he would just crack jokes about them, and just like it would just kind of ease the tension. I mean, we were there when the Turkish coup attempt happened in 2016, so we're trying to diffuse that situation. So some pretty like, and then ISIS is in Raqqa still, all this sort of stuff. Like it was a tense time to be overseas, and he still had that approachable, fun, like crack a joke, kind of make fun of himself, make fun of the people we're meeting with. He would do things like, to mess with us. He had a picture of his daughters, and they were pretty girls, and he would like hold up his picture to us and be like, "John, don't you think my girls are beautiful?" And you're like, "Sir,
Stop.
they're quite handsome. Yes, thank you."
Stop showing me this right now.
This is a trap. You
Yeah.
can't do this.
Yeah. What do you really think about him? What do you really think about him, John? No, that's incredible, man. And I've got some stories from football where there's this one, just quickly, there's this one time where our coach, and this wasn't so much a leader, but it was kind of like Joe, where you're talking about, but one guy was just, clowning around, doing this and that, just wasn't taking it seriously. And coach is like, all right, I think his name was, I'm not gonna, well, let me just keep his name out of it for now, but let's just say it was, let's just call him Miller. He's like, "Miller, you get off the field." And all of a sudden you just hear this, "No, Coach Han, you get off the field." And he just walks. And it was 2-a-days, and I don't even think that's a thing anymore. But it was just enough to just kind of be like, reset and just be like, it's going to be okay, and again, he was like one of our best players, so he's not going anywhere. But nonetheless, it was just one of those moments. So I guess to really kind of put a button on it, really when it comes down to leadership, it's like when I always kind of like to describe it as, when the tsunami's coming, you want to be that post that's holding up that deck in the water that just never moves. But at the same time, you got a smile on your face. Like, it's just that's kind of where we want to get to. It's like you're just unbreakable, but at the same time, you're a human being, and that's okay to show that human side. Maybe not complain as much. Keep those complaints to yourself, right? Well, John, it's been a pleasure having you on here, man. Thank you so much. My hat goes off to you, and I know just for the last little bit here, just if you want to give another shout out to what you're doing, maybe for the App State program. Is there any, if there are students that are interested, maybe is there a way that they can get more information?
Yeah, the program is called the Adventure Leadership Academy, and it's a multifaceted thing where we've got an Adventure Leadership Club we just stood up, and we're meeting every other week or so and doing some leadership training and having guest speakers. And I've got some pretty great corporate speakers coming in. I won't say their names because I don't have commitments yet, but and then we also do at least an annual, if not a twice yearly trip overseas. We're going to Scotland. We're going to climb the Ben Nevis, which is the highest peak in the UK, and we're going to do some adventure training out there and some leadership training, and we're going to do some one-on-one coaching. I've got my my colleagues Bon Jones and Paula Sharp. Bon is a 30-year veteran of Dell Computers. He was the vice president at Dell, ran their global operations, so his business sense and ability to coach and mentor these young business students is pretty crazy. Then Paula Sharp, who's an accountant at Wells Fargo, she's going to be traveling with us this year, and it's going to just be awesome mentorship and coaching for those students that are really chomping at the bit to get into the business world. And then we're also, and then I'm also developing some other possibilities in the leadership development world here in the Boone area, but those are kind of still in the works, so I won't get too deep into those.
I'm going to call you the Indiana Jones of leadership. Just the professor going on the adventures, and no, I think that caps it up. So again, Jon, thank you so much for jumping on here. And
I'm glad we were finally able to do this. We've been talking to each other for a couple of years now, so I'm glad we got this together.
And one of, I hope, more to come. And
Sure.
I know once we get more into the season down the road, we'd love to have you on here. Maybe we just review some games, review some leadership scenarios. Love to hear your take on that. So you're always welcome to jump back on here for sure.
Yeah, thanks to Joe and Cam for having me on here. I really appreciate it.